Hello there and welcome to the program. We are now continuing with the second part of our Writing Speeches for Great Presentations program. Here we're going to start to look at the strategies that you can use to write an effective introduction. The idea about an effective introduction is, of course, to capture your audience. So how can you begin to write that particular kind of introduction? It might pay to start by thinking about the question. That means thinking about the topic. Your whole speech will be a response to the topic that has been assigned to you to speak about. And your introduction, of course, is the first step towards that. So it's a good idea to use the question as a jumping off point, or the topic that you have as a jumping off point. Try writing your introduction last, by the way. That might help you out as well. This strategy is successful for some writers. You may think that you have to write your introduction first, but really sometimes that's not true. And it may not be the most effective way to get a great introduction. You might find that you don't know what you're going to really argue about at the beginning of the writing process, and that's going to come out as you write. And so only through the experience of writing your speech do you really get a feel for what the argument's going to be about. Do you really start to get quite interested and enthusiastic about how you can form your argument. So don't worry if you're not writing the introduction first. It seems to be logical though, doesn't it? The introduction is in the first part, so therefore you write it first. But that's a strategy that you can change. You can begin by writing it last if you wish. Then you have a really great feel for writing a fantastic introduction. So do think of that point. It's perfectly fine to start out thinking that you want to argue a particular point. You might think that way when you're fresh on the topic and starting to write about it. But also, you might end up arguing about something entirely different, or something even dramatically different, very different by the time you've written most of your speech. So here the point is, just relax. Go with the flow. Don't try to stick to routine. Choose what strategy works well for you. And if after you've written your argument you can then begin with a powerful introduction, then that's the way you should start to write it. And that will be very, very effective for you. Everybody's different. We don't want to categorize you too much and put you into shoeboxes. We don't want to do that. We want to help you develop your particular personality and have that come out in your writing style. As you write your argument, this actually helps you organize your ideas and think things through. It helps you make things very sophisticated as well. So the actual process of writing the argument is a very valid process. So an introduction written at the beginning of this discovery process, it may not really reflect what you end up with at the end. Just remember that point. You need to revise things. You need to make sure that the introduction and all of the middle part and the conclusion reflect the argument you intend. Make sure everything is in balance. Make sure it makes sense, so it is all perfectly connecting. So there are different ways of approaching this. And here, certainly don't think that because you leave the introduction to the end that that's wrong. It certainly isn't. It's all about your style and your preferences. Also, we can say to you to help you with your writing of your introduction, don't be too afraid to write a tentative one first and then change it later. These things don't have to be set in cement the minute you write them. They don't have to remain unchanged. They can be changed. This is the beauty of writing itself. So things can be adapted to and changed and added to, etc. Some people, however, in the way that they actually think and do things, they need to start with something at first. If they don't have that draft of an introduction or a tentative introduction written first, they may not be able to go any further in the process. That's just how their mind works. That's fine. But if you are one of these people, be sure that you don't forget to come back to your initial introduction and then rewrite it if that is necessary. So whatever works for you, whatever makes it easier for you to come with your free flow of thoughts and ideas and to have a powerful introduction, then that kind of strategy is what you need to work on. Open also, when you open your introduction, with an attention grabber. This is a strategy you can use that makes that introduction so powerful and so exciting. If your subject, for example, is a very technical one, particularly, you need to make it a little bit more upbeat or a little bit more interesting, so it's not so dry or not so boring. So open with something that's catchy, that can help you. For example, you could think of an intriguing example of something that has a little bit of curiosity about it, that you could open with. You could also begin with a very provocative question that starts people thinking, that goes into other areas that are a little bit sensitive, perhaps, and a bit exciting. So it's provoking some kind of reaction. A provocative question or a provocative quotation. There are plenty of quotations also that you can find. You can search these out on the internet, or you can buy books of quotations as well. Don't forget, there are tools to help you. You might begin and try to grab the attention of your audience with a puzzling scenario. Something that has a little bit of a question about it, and you need to have people solve something. A bit of a puzzle, so they begin to think and talk to their friend in the audience and start to begin to wonder about something. That can grab their attention. Or you could have a vivid, unexpected anecdote or a very thought-provoking question, as I just mentioned earlier. These grab the attention of the audience. After all, you want to wake them up. You want to shake them up. You don't want them to go to sleep, do you? Certainly not. So this is what you have to think about. The strategies to writing an effective introduction. As we're going through them, do start to think about what might suit you and what you feel comfortable with, and then try it out. Another strategy you can have when you're writing that introduction is to pay special attention to your first sentence. Make sure that the very first sentence actually says something useful, and that it does so in a very interesting way, and that you don't have any errors in it. If you have errors in it, then that's going to fall apart immediately, because you're relying on that first sentence to be your opener. So this is another strategy you can use. Seek out something very powerful and strong in that first sentence. And also in how to really start with a very good introduction is to just be very straightforward and confident. This can wake people up and make them straighten up their shoulders and pay attention. So the idea is to open up rather strongly. And having said that, you should really avoid statements like this. In this speech, I will argue that, blah, 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 blah. Now, that particular sentence may directly say that you're going to move on to the main argument and therefore you're giving information straight away. But it really isn't very interesting, is it? I don't think so. It's very standard, it's very dull, it's very boring. So it might be a little bit more effective to say what you mean in some kind of declaration. You need to add a bit of energy to it. Assert your main argument very confidently. You can't expect the audience to believe in your argument if it doesn't sound like you believe it yourself. So you need to add some energy to it. You need to put some drama in there perhaps, and really show that you are confident about what your argument will be. So these strategies will probably help you start that introduction writing, get you moving from the first step to the next. And I really do hope that these points have helped you out in that regard. After all, you do want to give a successful speech, don't you? Next, in this particular session, we're going to look at how you can make your speech easy to understand. There's no point writing very great introductions and powerful introductions and conclusions, etc., if the audience just can't understand it. So we'll take you through these particular areas so your speech is easy to understand. For example, you can repeat crucial points and buzzwords. Buzzwords, as you know, are certain words that have a feel to them and are commonly known in industries, etc. So repeat them, especially in longer speeches. It's an idea to remind your audience of the main points that you've made. So you might come up with a buzzword or repeat a special phrase that connects them from time to time. You can go back and say, remember our point on this particular issue was this. So you repeat it every now and then, only crucial points, and then your audience is understanding and they're continuing to understand. For example, you could link an earlier main point as you transition into your wrap-up of a new point, or wrap up a new point. So you have linkages. Remember, your speeches is kind of like a chain. There are many, many links to a chain, and they all have a particular meaning. They all have a particular purpose. So you are linking things together so you have a final end product. You could also address the relationship between earlier points and new points through discussion within a paragraph. Using buzzwords, for example, through your speech is a good idea. And repetition of key terms does make it easier for your audience to take in and connect information, as I said. So buzzwords, find those buzzwords, highlight them in highlighter so that you can remember them easily as you deliver your speech. Another way that you can actually help people understand more easily is to incorporate previews or summaries into your speech. For example, you could begin like this. I'm here today to talk to you about 3 issues that threaten our educational system. First, da-da-da, second, da-da-da, and third. Or you could say, I've talked to you today about such and such. Now, these kinds of phrases allow people in the audience to put together the pieces of your speech. They don't have to think too hard because you've just previewed it. You've just introduced it in a preview or a very brief summary. So they can spend more time paying attention to the content. You can, of course, use especially strong transitions. And when you do this, this will help your listeners see how new information relates to what they've heard so far. For example, if you set up a counter-argument in one paragraph, so you can demolish it in the next, begin the demolition by saying something like this. But this argument makes no sense when you consider that da-da-da. If you're providing additional information to support your main point, you could say, another fact that supports my main point is. So set things up so that when you actually want to demolish something in the next paragraph, you begin it by using but, for example. So use especially strong transitions, and these will really help the audience gain a clearer understanding of what the content of your speech is about. How do you help them listen? They've got a lot of listening to do, especially if you're talking to them for some period of time. So how do you do that? You can begin by using shorter and simpler sentence structures. You don't need to be too complicated. Certainly you don't need to bore them with lengthy explanations as well. So avoid using too many clauses and make sure that your subjects and verbs are close together. So things that are too complicated, let's take a look at this. The product, which was invented in 1910 by Peter Townsend III in Des Moines, Iowa, and which was on store shelves approximately 1 year later, still sells well. Now that is a little bit of a mouthful, isn't it? And it does sound a bit complicated. This might be easier to understand. Peter Townsend invented the product in 1910 and introduced it into stores shortly afterward. Almost a century later, the product still sells well. Now that's easy to understand. It doesn't have too much in it, but it's still understood, the main point. So do think about your sentences and how they are structured. We have indeed looked at the use of sentences and paragraphs in our technical writing skills program, and perhaps you might like to take some information from that program to help you here when you're writing your speeches. You might find that there's a pronoun problem. Let's look at this example. The government has failed to protect us from this reality television, which exploits sex, violence and petty conflict, and calls it human nature. This cannot continue. Why was the last sentence unclear? This what? What is the government failing to protect us from? This what? The government's failure, or reality TV, or human nature, or what? What is the government failing to protect us from? Let's make it more specific. We could say it like this. The government has failed to protect us from reality television, which exploits sex, violence and petty conflict and calls it human nature. This failure cannot continue. So here you see the difference. The way you use pronouns, etc., do have a bearing on whether your sentences are easy to understand or not. So you might need to have a look at your grammar skills and the way you put things together, particularly your sentences, in trying to make your message understood more easily. How do you keep that audience interested? We're helping them to listen, we're helping them to understand clearly. So how do you keep them interested? You might like to use these strategies of ethos, pathos and logos. Now what do they mean? They may not be very familiar to you. So let me explain. Ethos refers to an appeal to your audience by establishing your authenticity and your trustworthiness as a speaker. If you employ pathos, you appeal to your audience's emotions. If you are using logos, then this includes the support of hard facts, logic thinking, statistics and logical argumentation. These are from Greek, and so you have ethos, pathos, and logos. And really the most effective speeches usually have a combination of these different strategies in them. When you use ethos, pathos, and logos, this can really help convince your audience to believe in you, and it makes your argument much, much stronger. So appeal to their emotions, appeal to their logical thinking and debate, appeal to their authenticity so that they trust you and respect you. You can also keep them interested by using statistics and quotations sparingly. This is the key point. Only include the most striking factual material. Try not to overwhelm your speech with statistics or quotations. Otherwise, you may as well just stand in front of your audience with a quotation book and read from a quotation book. You're not really speaking from who you are. So remember this. Things like this really stick in the listeners' minds long after you've finished speaking. So you need to include striking facts, striking quotes, not too many. Otherwise, you will overwhelm them, as I said, and it's information overload. They're full up to here, and they won't absorb it. Pure and simple. It will pay for you also to keep your audience interested. Just watch your tone. Think about your tone. Listen to yourself. Try not to also talk over your audience. Don't be condescending and talk above their level of ability. You do have to regard this point very seriously. And don't forget, your audience will pick up on whether you are talking over them. They have sense, and it's something that is very quick to work out. You don't really need to yell or curse or use humour in a very inappropriate way. You don't need to do that to keep them interested. If you do that, then people will actually tune out. They'll get tired of it, and you're not really appealing to them that way. Try not to be too funny or overly funny. It just won't work. Try not to be too dramatic and shout and make big statements in a very dramatic way, overly so, because that will not work. So watch your tone, moderate it, make it more positive and interesting and filled with energy rather than yelling and screaming and being too dramatic. So let's look at ways of creating an effective conclusion to your speech. Certainly we've done the introductions, how you open it up, and trying to create an effective one. By now, I'm pretty sure you've got some very good ideas. Now we're going to come to the conclusion. So in the conclusion, it is important that you restate your main points, but you don't repeat them just to say them. Try not to use repetition here. For example, let's look at this. I asked earlier why we should care about the rainforest. Now I hope it's clear that da-da-da-da-da. Remember how Mrs. Smith couldn't afford her prescriptions. Under our plan, blah, 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 blah. So what you are saying here is, in the first example, you've asked earlier about the rainforest, you've got views and opinions. Now you're not going to repeat those views and opinions. You're now moving on to some kind of solution to that or some kind of action statement from that. So you're not repeating the views and opinions in your conclusion. In the second example, you're saying, remember how Mrs. Smith couldn't afford her prescriptions? So you're just jogging their memory. You're not telling them why she couldn't afford the prescriptions. You're not going to do that. You've just jogged their memory a little bit, made them think about that. Now the next words you say are, under our plan, la 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 la. So you're now moving forward with your end or your conclusion as to what is a result of that. So here, be careful. Don't repeat. People will know if all your conclusion is just a repetition. They don't want that. They want to see solutions and where you're moving forward with that particular argument. To create an effective conclusion, you could also have a call to action. Sometimes speeches close with an appeal for things to be done, an appeal for people to get together now that they have this new knowledge and understanding, to be able to work together on a project or be able to raise money for something or be able to move forward with a new building construction of a hospital and so forth. So don't forget that although your audience may not be able to affect certain things or, for example, foreign policy directly, they certainly can vote or work for candidates whose foreign policy views they support. This means that each and every person can do something after that particular speech to make an impact. It may not directly make an impact, but they can contribute to having some kind of action happen. So, relating the purpose of your speech to their lives not only creates a connection with your audience, but it also emphasizes the importance of your topic to them in the bigger picture of things, so that people feel valuable. What you have presented actually has drawn those people in, and they can actively be involved, even if it is in a small way. This is a great way of concluding a speech. Usually people go away rather fired up, rather determined to take some plans and implement things. And this means that you have been successful. Following on in this program, once you have completed your draft, how do you practice to make it effective? Once you've finished reading your draft or preparing your draft, then you can read it to a friend or you can read it in front of a mirror or whatever. So long as when you've finished reading it, you ask yourself the following questions. Which pieces of information are clearest? Where did I connect with the audience? Where might listeners lose the thread or start to get confused about my argument or description? Where might my listeners become bored? Where did I have trouble speaking clearly and or emphatically, strongly or boldly? Where did I have trouble doing that? And did I stay within my time limit? You do need to ask your questions after you've done rehearsals. When you've spoken out your speech in front of a mirror to yourself, etc. So you do need to, as I did before with you, take these questions, sit down and go through and answer them. And help your colleague or have your colleague help you come up with the answers. Get someone to be there to critique and to go through this with you. This is where you are, again, pulling apart your final speech, where you are doing a post-mortem, looking into the deeper aspects to try to get valuable feedback. So this is how you can practice for giving an effective presentation. Do follow these questions and I guarantee they will help you along the way. There's no doubt about that. And do not forget one point. Did I stay within my time limit? You must time speeches or must time presentations you're going to give. A lot of people forget to do that. Remember, you might be speaking in a seminar as one of other speakers, and therefore you have a time slot. So you have to prepare and you have to practice and rehearse with that in mind. You can't go over your time. A truly professional speaker will not go over time, and they'll know how to handle time because they have rehearsed it according to time. Something you can do here is get a stopwatch or use a clock and make note. Go back. If you need to expand, then add to the time. You need to do this very, very seriously so you make sure that you're not under time and most definitely you are not over time. So stay within your time limit. Now we are coming to the conclusions part. The conclusions part of this session. There are strategies for writing effective ones. And these will help you evaluate your drafted conclusions that you've got in rough form. And they may also suggest conclusion strategies that you should avoid. So remember that your introductions and your conclusions, as we have previously said, can be the most difficult parts to write. Do you agree with that? Do you find that you've got writer's block and you can't really sit down easily to write these things? While the body, the main content, is easier to write, it does need a frame around it. So, an introduction and conclusion really do frame your thoughts, and they are like a bridge, actually, that bridges your ideas for your reader or for your listener. So, just as your introduction acts as a bridge that is like a roadmap that launches and transports your audience from their lives into your speech, into the place where you are with your speech, your conclusion can also be a kind of bridge. And this will help your audience make the transition back to their daily lives. So you're bringing them into your particular world in your speech, and now you need to send them back out of your world, back to their lives. So such a conclusion will really also help them see why your analysis and all the information really do matter after they have listened to you. So your conclusion rounds things up and is the rationale behind perhaps why you have been with them on that day presenting. Your conclusion also is your last chance actually to have your last word, have the last word on the subject. You can tidy up and round up everything in the body of your speech, summarizing your thoughts to demonstrate the importance of the ideas and really leave your audience walking away with a whole new view of the subject. This is wonderful if people can go away from listening to you with a new take on something, a new way of thinking about something, because that means you have been successful. It's also, don't forget, your chance to make a final good impression and to end on a very positive note. It could be then that you are asked to come back again and again to speak on other subjects to this particular audience. So that's a win-win situation, isn't it, for every single person? Your conclusion can also go beyond the actual boundaries of your particular topic. And it allows you to open up all sorts of other questions, broader issues, and to elaborate on the significant things that you have found. So conclusions can be extremely dramatic. They can leave an audience walk away with a very fresh view of things. And you can actually re-energize people, recharge their batteries, so to speak, purely because of how you give your conclusion. And finally, the last 4 points about your conclusion. It really should make your audience glad that they came along to hear you. Happy that they didn't actually waste their time, that they had a good time with you and that they enjoyed it. They need to feel that they're taking something away that will help them perhaps see things differently and maybe appreciate your topic in other ways as well. So really your conclusion can suggest, as I said, broader things, broader implications that will not only interest them but also enrich their life in some way. And finally, your conclusion can be seen as a kind of gift. It's your gift to them. After you've had such a wonderful introduction and argument and debate and discussion perhaps, or you have shared very valuable information with them, finally you can feel that you are giving them something special, that you're giving them a gift. They will remember you. Most definitely they will remember you for this. So how do you go about writing this very effective conclusion? Here we have some strategies, and I will outline them for you. Let's take a look at the first one. You could play the so what game. So quite simply, if in trying to write your conclusion, or if you feel that it's not really saying very much, it's not saying anything new, it's not saying anything interesting, what you can do is to ask a friend to read it with you. And whenever you make a statement from your conclusion, get your friend to say, so what? Or, why should anybody care? Now, when they say those two questions, you need to ponder those. You need to consider them and think about the questions and then answer it. So let's take this a little bit further, and this is how it might proceed. Let's look at the line here. It says you. This is what you are saying. Basically, I'm just saying that education was important to Maggie. Your friend will say, so what? You will then say, well, it was important because it was a key to her feeling like a free and equal citizen. Your friend will then say, well, why should anybody care? And you will say, it's important because plantation owners at the time tried to keep slaves from being educated so that they could maintain control. When Maggie obtained an education, she destroyed that control personally. So there you see, when you ask, so what and why should anybody care, it does get you to realize the impact of your conclusion and the statements in it. The fact is that people should care. You should be able to say, yes, they care because. It's important because. It should be there because. So this is just a strategy, the so what game, to push you to make sure that you're realizing that the conclusion has validity and what you're saying is important. People do really care about it. Another strategy you can use is that you can return to the theme that you opened with in your introduction. And this kind of strategy brings, we say, the audience full circle. It brings them back to where you started to first talk with them. If you begin by describing a scenario, you can end with the same scenario as proof that your speech is helpful in creating a new understanding. It's a connector. It comes full circle. And so you're really validating the whole topic by being able to do that. You're showing that everything there has a connection. Everything that you've talked about has a true basis to it. You can also refer to the introductory paragraph by using keywords or concepts or images that you used in the introduction. You could just prompt the audience and say, remember when we first opened our discussion today, we talked about point A and B. So in your conclusion, you can highlight these, and then you can bring the audience back full circle so they feel that it's all been worthwhile and that they can see the total connection. Other strategies are, you can, instead of summarizing things, synthesize. Now this simply means that you include a brief summary of the paper's main points, but you don't repeat things. Instead, you show how these points that you made and the support and examples you use actually fit together. How this particular thing pulls this thing together, and so this and this also pull together. So you are actually showing them by using words how the pieces of the puzzle are now coming together and they are making one total picture. Imagine you're doing a jigsaw puzzle. It's the same kind of technique. You're now filling in the last pieces of the puzzle. You have a picture and perhaps there are 10 pieces missing of the puzzle. Now you are pulling in your 10 pieces and making that picture whole. Finally, you can also include some provocative kind of insight or statement or quotation that you got from your research or your reading that you did for your speech. So you can use this as a powerful way to bring your conclusion to the audience. Finally, in your conclusion and a strategy for writing an effective conclusion, you can propose a course of action or propose a solution to an issue. This technique can redirect your audience's thinking and can help them to apply the information you gave them and the ideas you have to their own life, or to see the broader implications. So here you are letting them walk away and they are gaining benefit because they are going to act on something. They are going to actually gain in their own lives from the information that you have shared with them in the speech. Conclusions need to be powerful. And as I said, we are also going to take a look here at the strategies to avoid with conclusions. Don't begin with unnecessary and overused phrases. And here are some, for example, that people do use as a habit, and it is quite a boring and quite a bad habit. They say in conclusion, or in summary, or in closing. These are overused a lot. So why don't you look for something a little bit more creative? These actual phrases do work in speeches, however, they do come across as being rather wooden, and they're used so much that sometimes they don't really have much meaning. So use your own personality, your own unique way of beginning your conclusion. You could say something like, I have really had a very good time being here with you today, and I would like to bring up these points so that you can go away feeling very good about what we've talked about. That is something you could do. There are many things you can do, so be creative. Start to use your creative writing skills and get away from the standard, usual, boring ways of saying things. Another strategy you should avoid is introducing a new idea or subtopic in your conclusion. This is not the place to do that. It's too late. Don't do that. You will confuse people. So in the time that you prepare your draft and in your outlining and questioning of your content, you do need to be careful of this thing. The conclusion is not meant for new ideas. They should have come up in the body of your speech. Another strategy to avoid is ending with a rephrased statement without any real changes to it. You need to be careful of your choice of words. Also, making sentimental or emotional appeals that are really not in character with the rest of the speech. That is not a good strategy. You need to remember the whole tone must be balanced. The whole character of the speech can't really change dramatically from beginning to the end. So make sure that you don't do that. And also, you do need to be wary of this point. including evidence or quotations and statistics, etc., that should have been in the body of the speech. So your conclusion is a very special place to be. It's going to be very powerful. It doesn't need to go through details there in the main body. What it needs to do is to excite and to stir people up to an extent that they go away with a very good feeling about the topic that you have presented today. So much so that they want to come back for more. That is the idea. That is your true aim. I'd just like to run through some examples of ineffective conclusions so you're very clear about this, because I do want to state emphatically that the conclusion is, remember, your last opportunity to speak. So first up, we can see here that if you end up in your conclusion by saying, that's my story and I'm sticking to it, then that is very ineffective. You may feel very strongly about what you have spoken about, and that's very good. But to say something like this, that you're sticking to your opinions, that's it, is not really very effective. This just restates your view and is usually too short, and it doesn't actually bring new ideas, new discussion forward. People usually write this kind of conclusion when actually they can't think of anything else to say. So it is very poor indeed. Don't just end up saying, well, there you go, you've got my story and that's what I believe and that's it. Thank you very much. Goodbye. That is very ineffective. Don't ever go down that road. And if you do, then you are not going to be very successful. Your conclusion can lose the impressions that you've tried to make all through your speech. The second kind of ineffective conclusion is what we call the Sherlock Holmes conclusion. Now, you might think it might be very dramatic to keep the reader in the dark till the end. And as I mentioned before, you try to keep things hidden so you wow people with them in the final part of your speech. Like your main idea, you want to leave it for the bottom line, the real dramatic statement, like in a Sherlock Holmes mystery. However, the reader doesn't see it that way. The listener doesn't see it that way. They want to see this in the beginning, in the main part. They don't want to wait till the end. It's too long to wait. And also, the listener is really not expecting a mystery. They are looking at perhaps an analytical discussion or another kind of discussion with an argument where people can debate things and state things up front. So it serves no purpose to keep your main point right to the end. Here again, you may lose all the great impressions you've made throughout in this weak and effective conclusion. The third ineffective conclusion that we'd like to demonstrate here is the America the Beautiful, I am woman, we shall overcome kind of conclusion. This kind of conclusion is one that usually draws on emotion to make an appeal. But actually, while this emotion and even sometimes sentimentality can be very heartfelt and be very warming, it usually is out of character with the rest of an analytical speech where you're putting up arguments and demonstrating debates, etc. Really, it does depend on the kind of speech or the topic that you're presenting and the nature of it. But generally speaking, you don't want to emotionally charge your conclusion. You don't want to put in all these emotional appeals because your audience actually will see that that's out of character. What you need to do is to give perhaps a more sophisticated kind of commentary. So you come away looking the real professional, rather than being thought of as somebody who's just trying to charge up the feelings and emotions of people. So here we have another ineffective conclusion, which may actually mean your whole speech, bang, falls flat. If you are speaking on a more motivational issue, then most certainly this style might be very effective. However, remember, generally in business you're speaking to provoke discussion and analysis of things and get debates and solutions. So this kind of conclusion here is certainly not effective at all. And finally we come to the fourth ineffective conclusion, the grab bag conclusion we call it. And this conclusion includes extra information that the writer found or thought of, but actually couldn't integrate it into the main part of the speech. He's found it, finally, and now he wants to shove it all or put it all in one bag at the end. He couldn't integrate it into the speech as he went through the speech. Now, you might find it hard to leave out details that you discovered after hours of research and thinking, but if you look at additional or adding random facts and bits of evidence at the end of a very good organized speech, then this can just create confusion. People will know you've been organized throughout the speech, and so they get a little bit shocked or a little bit surprised when you bring in additional things that really don't match and that really show that you haven't been careful in how you've planned putting that information into the main body. So this can just create confusion. Here you are adding things at the last minute in a desperate manner to try to put things and pack things in to the conclusion where they actually should have been in the main body. So there you have it. Examples of ineffective conclusions. And indeed throughout this whole program that we've been talking through together, there are some very important pointers that certainly can make you a very effective writer of your speeches and indeed a very effective presenter as well. Work with a colleague. Take note of all these points. And if you do that, then certainly you are going to have a very successful speech and presentation. Remember, there are parts and points you do need to consider. You have to open well. You have to really do your homework and research to integrate all the main parts that you want to talk about into the body of your speech. And you have to be aware that your argument makes sense. When you're wrapping up and looking at the conclusion, you have to impact your audience so they go away feeling very, very good about the whole event, the whole experience. And chances are too that you also will go away feeling that you've done a very good job. I do wish you every success with your speeches and with your papers that you are preparing to deliver, and certainly presentations in all different kinds of forums. Thank you very, very much for your attention, and goodbye.